Welcome back. Today we have episode 7 and a special guest, President Weiner. He's the president of Assumption University. We got Spencer back on this one too. Let's go. So, right. President Weiner, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it.
And Spencer hasn't been on in a few episodes.
I'm back.
Right?
Finally, where you been, Spencer?
Playing baseball, actually.
Yeah.
That's a good excuse.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want to postpone episodes, and I was preparing for them, and Spencer was busy with baseball, so we had the interview with Professor McGrath and then the interview with Professor Coleman. Great conversations. Interviewing Professor McGrath was my first interview, and it was kind of weird. Now, this is our first interview.
Yeah,
but
it's
your first one together?
Right,
Yes.
right. But it is, it's more of a conversation, and we're comfortable in those environments, so... How's everything going for you, President Weiner? You just said that you didn't make it to the seniors versus faculty kickball game. Are you upset about that?
I'm outraged.
Okay.
Dave, I'm
Good.
outraged. No, I had planned on stopping by, and I couldn't, and probably would have
no reschedule?
Injured myself in some embarrassing way if I had shown up.
Good. So, we got some involvement from students. Some of my friends who knew we were recording this episode with you, they wanted to ask a few questions.
Very popular guy, as it seems.
Spencer, do you want to ask the first one?
Oh, sure, yeah. One of the first questions we got was, they asked about your motivation to actually become president, and we wanted to ask you, with your long-time involvement at the school, did you actually want to become president? Was that something you actively engaged in? And I know obviously it's where you ended up, but yeah.
It wasn't a career aspiration. I enjoy doing it, and I think it's very important work. I certainly didn't come here with the intention of entering administration at any level. We were at a crucial moment in the life of the institution and the nature of the education that we offer, which I think is really important. And so I've enjoyed that very much. It's there are ups and downs as there are in any job, but it's always very meaningful work.
That's very cool, though. It seems like there was a void, and they could have waited for people and interviewed people and reached out to other people. But I'm assuming you stepped up to some degree and said, "I'm willing to do this and take on more responsibility."
Well, when I was provost in since June, I think, or summer of 2019.
Right.
And when this transition began, I was asked to step in as interim, which I was very happy to do. And then a search committee was formed, and a search firm was hired, and things went from there.
Okay, well.
Excellent.
That's good. A second question, I think this one's great. The question is, how does your background as a political scientist help/affect your position as president?
So there are really two questions there, because I have a professional background in politics before academia. I was mostly a press secretary and a communications consultant for political figures and then corporate ones.
Cool.
And I do think that is very valuable in terms of knowing how to say things or taking care to say things in ways that people can hear and that are persuasive. I think it honed my listening skills as well. The ability to see common ground where it's not obviously there, where your sort of first inclination is to see a dispute. So I think all that from my political career helped a lot. One thing that was missing for me in my political career, or what it's not something that was missing, but something I sort of discovered along the way. I've told this story 100 times, so you guys have probably heard it at least 90. But I majored in government as an undergrad, and I thought I wanted to go to work for the government. And somebody said, "Well, I should think about the Foreign Service." And there was this class being offered called Communism in Eastern Europe. So. I took the class. It was taught by a Polish constitutional lawyer who used to say jokingly that what he really liked about teaching that class was you never had to update your syllabus because nothing ever changed in the politics of Eastern Europe.
Cool.
Well, that was the fall semester of 1989, and about 6 weeks into the semester, the Berlin Wall fell, and quite suddenly, quite sudden onrush of events. And I still have the book from that class. And I've always made it a habit when I'm teaching showing that on the first day of class, because overnight everything became irrelevant overnight. There's nothing in that book mattered anymore. That's not to say that technical information doesn't matter. It matters a lot. But what was interesting to me when I was working in politics, and for about 7 years I worked in the United States Senate.
Wow.
And I went back and looked at the Federalist Papers, and there's a brace of essays on the Senate, and those hold up pretty well. So I think one of the things my political career taught me, which has bridged with my work as a political scientist, is the idea that the fundamentals, the enduring ideas, are what stick. And they have to, in order to make the more concrete and disciplinary specific things that you're learning durable, they have to be grounded on ideas, because ideas are what last in a lifetime of change.
I think that's excellent insight. I think a lot of times when I talk to other students about political science classes, politics classes, a lot of people have the misconception that they're either teaching or learning about just simple party politics. And I think the idea that those core principles are what, we build foundations off of, and, they remain so durable throughout so much of our history, that is lost on people. So I think that's excellent insight.
Well, I think there's something very unique about our political science department, and that is its theoretical grounding.
Right.
So every topic is taught from the perspective of the theoretical, the enduring ideas. So when I taught American government, we started with the Federalist Papers, for example. When we teach what would at other institutions be called international relations, you're going to read Thucydides. And it's a very unique, a true political education, and one that's going to stick with you through while things change.
Yeah, so I have a handful of questions. The first one is, we were learning about Rousseau in our philosophy class, and he's very theoretical. And you explained Machiavelli to me a little bit. I don't know much about Machiavelli.
What Rousseau are you doing?
Basic political reading,
the two discourses
and
two
discourses,
the social contract as well.
Yeah. But you explained that wasn't Machiavelli more kind of realistic, not a theorist, and you learned that in Dobsky's class.
Professor Dobsky's class, which was Introduction to Political Science, Political Philosophy rather. Excellent class. I learned a lot, very enriching. We did read Machiavelli, and he one of his defining characteristics is that he wasn't so much focused on the theoretical, like imagined principalities and ideas, and rather the effectual truth. That is interesting. I wonder how that ties into how we teach and understand politics now.
Well, so my field is the political thought of the American founding, and there's kind of a cottage industry of what philosophers influenced whom, and there's a reading of the American founding that says the Republican tradition that dates to the smaller Republican tradition, civic Republican tradition that dates to largely to Machiavelli.
Sure.
Was influential. I'm not 100% sure I buy that, but there's certainly a profound difference
contemporary
between
Republican party.
No,
this
this would be like civic republicanism, concerned with the public square and and so forth. I do think those two, in particular, present quite a contrast in terms of Rousseau. To my reading, is very much an idealist. It's useful to read ideals, but you read the second discourse, for example, and you wonder, did this guy have kids? If he thinks that we're all behave perfectly in our natural state.
Exactly.
And Machiavelli, I think, in some ways satisfying, in some ways unsatisfying, challenges his readers to think. I'm not sure if realism has a sort of specific meaning in political science, but more pragmatically would be fair.
Right. Yeah. So, when you're explaining your background in politics, the thing that I guess I didn't quite understand what it didn't teach you, was it that it didn't teach you that things, whereas philosophy might explain broader ideas that you can apply to different situations, political science gives you specific ideas for specific situations?
I would say the kind of undergraduate political science education that I had, which was at a large state school, very different place from Assumption, was, I would say, more focused, not entirely, but more focused on sort of how to public policy. How do you analyze things? We teach all that here, and it's very important. What I think was missing, and what working in national politics taught me was that ideas are in fact what matter. That's what sticks with you.
I want to kind of hold off on fully talking about liberal arts. I want to talk about enrollment first, but I can't help but bring up the fact that I think my liberal arts education here has helped me be more comfortable in uncomfortable situations, or understanding that all the things with it are in the pursuit of meaning are uncertain to a certain degree, and that makes me think of the uncertainty that like liberal arts helps you deal with through political science or through philosophy. But yeah, do you want to talk about enrollment first, and then we'll get back into that?
Yeah, for sure.
Just wanted to bring it up.
So to change gears a little bit, to talk about enrollment. Obviously, I think a higher enrollment is a goal for any institution, and obviously it seems to be for Assumption. So me and Gabe had kind of discussed whether that goal for Assumption, because obviously we're a smaller institution, smaller school, and we wanted to ask if a higher enrollment would necessarily benefit the school. Obviously, there's clear reasons for profit, appeal, set an example, and appeal to prospective students. But yeah, I just wanted to hear your takes on that.
Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. You're catching me on a good day, because our undergraduate deposit deadline was the day before yesterday.
Oh, nice.
I don't think enrollment can be a goal in and of itself.
Okay.
We're not a corporation. It's not a matter of if we sell more widgets, we make more money.
Right.
Enrollment is a goal if it is making the kind of education we offer available to more people.
Fair enough.
Excellent.
Obviously, it has significant financial implications.
Right.
And my feeling is that our facilities, as they now stand, which are beautiful and have been expanded a lot in the last few years, can hold more students than we currently have. So I do think growth is possible, and I would say imperative.
Excellent.
This might be a bad question, but what would be the sweet spot? Like 5,000 seems like too much, even 4,000. But
yeah.
3,
So
3.5.
My feeling, and I've said this publicly, is that a goal for us, an aspirational goal, should be 3,000 students between undergraduate and graduate by the time we celebrate our 125th.
And when is that?
Anniversary in 2029.
I should know that. Okay.
Right, 2029. So,
cool.
which I think is possible. It's a reach goal, and goals should be ambitious, but I think we can do it.
Cool.
Yeah, they should be ambitious. We talked we like to relate our classes to this because we think they're very helpful. I've brought up Ortega y Gasset before. I don't know if you've read him, but he talks about limitations and how limitations aren't necessarily bad. I think another thing I've maybe taken from liberal arts is that something that transcends you and something that you're reaching for that's challenging is maybe the path to meaning. Would you agree with that? And if so, kind of what was maybe the first thing that brought you on that path to meeting?
I'm actually working on a book right now about politics and limits. And,
oh, wow.
So we can talk about that if you want to follow up on it, but I won't bore you with it prematurely.
Okay.
I think that I'm not sure I could identify any one particular moment, except for a general feeling, and this is in some ways a very Augustinian feeling of restlessness. So I worked in politics, strictly speaking, for 7 or 8 years, and then I went into consulting. And you start in political consulting, and then you have kids, and you realize it's a little bit tougher. Yeah. And I drifted into corporate consulting, and so with a little bit of politics, but primarily corporate. And I felt very restless. And I started taking night classes at Georgetown, and was awakened, I would say, relatively. This is my early 30s, I think. So you guys have a good 10 or 11 year jump on me.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, man.
Becoming curious. So
yeah, right.
That's
wow. Okay.
Interesting.
This is arguably happening to us now and over the past year and a half. Do you think you can recall a moment or a thing that has caused you to strive towards more meaning?
Absolutely. I think I can kind of pinpoint it. And it's a kind of a shout out to Professor Stoner. But that very first philosophy class I took that introduced me to liberal arts, that we took together actually in the honors program the fall of our freshman year, was Socrates and the Search for Truth. And just as an intro class, that really, really opened my eyes. I had never experienced anything like that in high school. And I was really able to kind of start to understand. I'd always had certain curiosities, and, I took some really good history and government classes in high school, but nothing really super comprehensive or anything that really drilled down in anything a ton. So by the time I came here, and that class kickstarted it all and really made me aware of it.
What did you come here expecting to study?
That's a great question, because I came here to play baseball first and foremost. And not that studies were a secondhand thought or anything like that. But I was kind of unsure. I had an interest in psychology, but I wasn't totally aware of the opportunities the institution presented. So like I said, that first class really made me aware of it and really kickstarted the whole thing for me.
I think there is something very unique about Assumption students, and I've taught not for a long time, but briefly at more what would by conventional terms be considered more elite Ivy League kinds of institutions. What I was thinking as you were saying that, Spencer, is that it's not unusual for me to hear 17-year-olds don't want to hear about your philosophy classes or liberal arts or whatever else.
Right.
Yeah.
In my answer to that is I'm a lot more worried about the 47-year-olds than I am about the 17-year-olds, in the sense that, by the time I may or may not be older than 47 at this moment, but, you're consumed as you should be with practical things.
Sure.
And I find that the minds of Assumption students, whether they're studying philosophy or psychology or accounting or whatever else it might be, are really open to wonder and discovery.
Sure.
And that's not the case in a lot of places. There are a lot of places where either students maybe have an exclusively pragmatic focus, and there are places, frankly, where students come in thinking, "Oh, I already know everything, and I just need you to punch my ticket on my way to somewhere else." And I think there are a lot of moments here, like the one you described, and across a lot of different disciplines. And I think it says a lot about our students that you are open to receiving that moment, to experiencing that moment.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would agree with that.
That was that's insightful.
Yeah.
I think that, that builds onto the question of, you brought up 17-year-olds. I know that wasn't the focus of your idea there, but how can the school express the importance and value of a liberal arts education to prospective students and market it to a certain degree? Can you market liberal arts?
I think you absolutely can, and I think there are a couple of ways to do it. In the Catholic liberal arts specifically, there's a lot of pressure, as you both know, I'm sure, on incoming college students to know exactly what they're going to be doing
For sure, yeah.
the day after graduation, and you're going to have loans to repay, and I get all that.
Yeah.
What you need to be thinking about is A, your first job, that's important, but B, your second career. And we know that most people now are going to have many careers, most of them in fields that we don't yet know exist.
Yeah.
And liberal arts education, a true liberal education, I think provides both meaning and adaptability to change.
Absolutely.
The Catholic nature of it, I think, is centered on a view of human nature that sees the individual as made in the image of God, and this we typically don't pursue this sentence all the way to the end, and therefore oriented toward using what in philosophy and theology as well, but it's called logos to pursue the truth, and that's reason embodied in speech, which means there is within each of us. You got it at your freshman year. I got it in my early 30s. There's a desire to be awakened.
Yep.
So I think the tradition, rather, of Catholic liberal education is marketable in both of those senses. One is that this kind of education is a good in itself. That's what makes it a liberal education. And because we treat it as a good in itself, it's very useful.
Right.
So you probably didn't walk out of Socrates and the Search for Truth saying, my first job, I'm going to be ready to talk about the Plato's Apology or something.
Right.
But I bet your mind grew. I bet you had your appreciation for things like truth and beauty grew, and those are the most marketable skills that we hear from employers that they need, are the ability to think, to process information, and to communicate.
Yeah.
And this type of education isn't reducible to that. In fact, I think if it were reduced to that, if we were to say today you're taking a class in thinking, tomorrow you're taking a class in reading, and then you're taking a class in writing, I don't think it would be very, very effective. It's the comprehensive nature of it.
Totally agree.
That's very nice. I think that I appreciate your optimism about students wanting to be or having a desire to be awakened, but I almost think that more students, the desire to be awakened is outweighed by the fear of the truth, and there's the problem probably in that is that they think they have the truth, or there's even like another barrier before the fear of the truth, and that's kind of what I see.
I see that at times too. Yeah.
Fear of pushing ideas.
Fear of
Fear
really
of
exercising
doing the
your
work
ideas.
itself,
I've heard people say like, we can't talk about this. It's political. Like, we just have to not talk about it.
Well, I think discomfort is not a bad place for all of us to be.
Right.
That goes back to that Augustinian feeling of restlessness. He describes that in the garden, where the quote is from the statue out in front of the Sosis building. I said at the inauguration that there were two virtues associated with this kind of education. One is humility, which is to say, I might be wrong, or you might have some piece of the truth that I don't have. And how do we know that's a virtue of education? Because logos is not simply abstract reason; it's reason embodied in speech, which means you have to have someone you're speaking with, and there's a need. There's an interdependence there. And the second virtue is courage, that we need to be confident of two things. One is that our own ideas can withstand rigorous debate.
Yep.
And the second is we need to have the courage to say if a given idea can't withstand rigorous debate, then maybe I should think about it some more.
Okay, right.
Yeah. I think I want to bring up one kind of specific example and idea. And a credit to my dad for this. We were talking about this earlier, but he used the example of a place like Hampshire College in Western Mass, and so I'm not super familiar with it. I've done a little bit of reading on it, but I know that, at least in my view, my perspective, they take liberal arts education and kind of push it to the fullest form in that idea of like self-education and enriching students as much as possible by letting them pick the curriculum and then allowing professors to support them in engaging those ideas, like you had just said, kind of on their own and letting them develop. And obviously, this is a very specific and that's their only goal as an institution. But I was just wondering, do you think Assumption could ever pursue or consider a program like this, kind of in order to advance that cause of liberal arts education, a little bit further? Because there's so much potential with professors, like you said, facilities, and if students are willing and open to do this, I think there's a huge possibility there.
Well, we do have the possibility of students putting together their own programs of study, their own majors. What I do think is important and unique, and we've just modified our core curriculum now called the Foundations Program, so that it is more flexible and has more, I think, cohesiveness to it. I do think one of the distinguishing features of an Assumption education is that every student, whether they're studying political science, my field, whether they're studying social sciences, whether they're studying neuroscience or marketing or whatever else it might be, nursing, is grounded deeply in these, in a range of enduring ideas. My concern with the sort of choose your own adventure curriculum is that it presumes that we know what we don't know.
Okay.
So, so I would just ask you, for example, if you were choosing your own curriculum, would you have been in Professor Stoner's class?
That's a great question.
Yeah, no, that's
With my experience in high school, like in retrospect, I would hope so, but I don't know. That's a good
Right,
question.
and by the way, it works both ways. There are students who come in with a deep interest in philosophy, but who would not take, for example, a science class.
Right.
So so I think it's important to be open to receiving that, to challenging it, challenging it, but also to receiving it.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. To shift gears a bit, who are your favorite political scientists or philosophers that you've kind of learned about in the past?
And then maybe you draw some influence
Sure.
from.
Yeah.
And,
One of my interests is the political thought of people who are actually active in politics, and the philosopher statesman. I think it's not quite the right phrase, but the sort of scholar statesman might be a better way to put it. Has a long tradition in the United States, going back to Ben Franklin and Madison, who I wrote a book about. I think is and it was an exemplar of that. Certainly not a perfect man, and many people would say not a great president, but a very important thinker. Lincoln, I would say, is a wonderful example of a completely self-educated person who I don't know that we've had a more profound thinker as president of the United States. I also wrote a book on a guy named Pat Moynihan, and Moynihan was a senator from New York. He had this is what he's most known for. He had a variety of positions in government. He had a PhD from Tufts University, and was, I think, really the model of the scholar statesman in the sense that he was deeply committed New Deal liberal, but also willing to challenge his party on
Nice.
what seemed like orthodoxies.
Cool.
Sorry, I got to throw one more.
Please do.
Yeah.
Edmund Burke, who was a Anglo-Irish statesman in the late 18th century, would very much resist being called a philosopher because he thought philosophical politics were problematic in a lot of ways. But a very deep thinker about prudence, which I think is really the essential political virtue, the ability to say, here are my principles over here, and here's this really messy world over here. How do I get the two?
So,
Gotcha.
and we don't need to talk about specific political ideology, but when I see our current state of politics, I don't see that idea of prudence. I mean, I didn't even think that that's part of government, like our government, because in the past 5-6 years, it didn't really seem like it was, and it almost seems like the government is trying to say, hey, everything's okay, like everything's okay, when it's not. The world's not. I mean, we know that. So what would you say to that?
I would say that one problem for prudence, and the same, I would say even more so for moderation in politics, is the inability of moderation to make it's not an inability, but the failure of moderation to make a case for itself.
Okay.
Which is to say, there seems to be something admirable if you're all the way on the left and you're all the way on the right, and I'm somewhere in the middle trying to figure out what's true or what's best. That there's something that seems reasonable about that. But if on the other hand, which one did I forget which one of you I assigned which one?
I'm the left.
You're the far left. You're the far right.
Yeah.
You can make a really rousing speech that says this is the way it is, the country's going great, or it's going down the drain, or whatever it might be. And there is, I wrote an article about this about a year ago. There is a moral case for moderation, and it's grounded in humility, which is to say, I'm not as certain of everything as you guys are.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I found more now, like studying and
Absolutely.
gaining, I think, some humility, that I think I have a political idea. And then I actually do research into it, and I'm like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, you check it back, yeah.
Well, like, what? I don't know.
And it's a
I didn't think about
byproduct of
this.
our liberal arts education. It really
Well,
is.
and I think there's a challenge there, which both Burke and Lincoln embodied, Moynihan too in a lot of ways, which is when you're acting in politics or really anywhere in life, you cannot simply be uncertain. So, I think there's an important role that Catholic liberal education plays in unsettling
Right.
Your ideas, but you also know that when you have to make a moral decision or a political decision, or whatever else, you have to decide.
You have
right?
to
And you
do
have
something,
and you're not going to be able to pull out a calculator and say, well, this is 2 + 2, so the answer must be 4. The world is a lot murkier than that.
It brings me back to freshman year, fall semester. There was this talk, I think it was you, Professor McGrath, and maybe 2 others. It was in Testa. I think it was you. Because I think I raised my hand and I asked a question, and I asked something like, as I'm trying to understand that things are uncertain, or like as I'm trying to question myself, I'm like less confident in my ideas or something. And I think it's interesting that I kind of asked that question last year, and it hasn't really changed, but you remind me of it.
So I think humility is not the worst virtue in learning, particularly, but also in politics. But if you take someone, a political figure like Lincoln, who was willing to examine his own ideas and willing to listen to other people's ideas, he also had to make decisions hundreds of times a day. And and there's the confidence to do that, even while you are remaining open to a sort of intellectual and moral humility, I think is a very rare combination.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
We can, we got a little more time here. Well, I guess we can go into. I want to ask a few questions about Pub Cup. So, it's funny because my dad who went here, of course, graduated in, I think, I don't want to say the year, maybe 89, I don't know. But him and his friends, there was a Pub Cup event, which was, and you're gonna find this to be crazy. You might know about this. There was a Pub Cup event where a bunch of limos came and picked up students, like seniors. Like, so each group was assigned a limo, and there's a scavenger hunt. I don't know if it was sanctioned by the school, but it must have been, just because they had all the limos, and they went around and did like this crazy scavenger hunt.
That one I haven't heard.
You haven't heard that? No. Well, we got to bring that back. So
I'll look into it.
Okay, good. Yeah, look into. Well, I can too. We can work together on it. But yeah, of course, kegs in the limo is, when you're 22, is legal, and I think actually, is it legal? Yeah, limo kegs.
Yeah, I got another question there.
Would Assumption ever not sanction the Pub Cup, or would it always be sanctioned?
I think it's an important tradition. I suppose, I'm sure anybody could imagine scenarios where we would or wouldn't make a given decision, but I think those traditions are great, and my experience of students is that when you treat them like adults, they act like adults. Right. And a couple people get rowdy and make bad decisions, and I know plenty of adults who get rowdy and make bad decisions. But last spring and this spring, my wife and I went down to the Valley just to hang out a bit. And students they were having fun, but being reasonable. I think that's what we should expect of one another.
Would there ever be a way that freshmen and sophomores could also go to Pub Cup, even although there is alcohol present? There, I guess, have to be some changes with that. Do you think that'd be possible?
I don't know what our exact rules are. I know we were checking IDs, and there were wristbands for if you lived in the Valley and were 21. I can tell you our vision for the pub that we're hoping to build is that it would be accessible to all students, but obviously with appropriate control of the alcohol.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's a big idea that almost not a lot of students know about. I think that's a really great opportunity to bring some life to the center campus. And
well, there's a graduating senior named Patrick Sedgwick who has championed this since last year. He's currently Senate Speaker. I can't remember what he was last year, but he put a committee together. And right after, I think my first meeting with student leaders after I became interim president, he said, "Well, I've got this business plan for a pub, and I'll work on it over the summer and send it to you." I said, "Well, no, you'd send it to me this afternoon." And he did, and it was, I think, a well-developed, well-thought-out proposal. It did have one location proposed. It identified a series of potential locations, and my favorite one, I can't remember which building, but he listed upsides and downsides.
That's fair.
And one of them was near the chapel, and he says, good for confession. So, anyway,
that's good stuff.
Patrick has been a tireless champion of this, as has
great.
Molly Tempesta, the SGA president, and the other SGA officers. We've been working on it for a year and probably need to update the community more.
Sure.
There have been, the licensing process always takes a little bit longer than you expected, and we were looking at some dining options that may have affected it and so forth.
Gotcha.
Right, and another question regarding dining. Is Taze getting moved?
Not in the near term. We did spend a lot of the last year looking at it, at whether dining would make sense in Hagen.
Okay.
The problem is, what was interesting about it to me was the way the center of campus has shifted from, let's say, when your dad was here, or for that matter, even when I started teaching here. Taylor is kind of an outlying facility for a lot of students. So what happens is at any given moment, some students are in Taylor and some are at Charlie's, and it never and you miss out on the liveliness. The challenge we're facing, and we are looking at some improvements too. We've made some already this semester and are looking at some other improvements for Taylor, but Hagen wasn't built for that purpose.
Right.
So taking a building that exists for this purpose and causing it to serve another purpose unleashes all kinds of logistic, whether it's construction or where do you move this office, and if you move this office there, that office has to go somewhere else.
And it's like, do we need to do that kind of thing? And it's obviously costly. And then what do you do?
Well, and one thing that was really important to students, which I appreciate, and in fact, alumni on the board mentioned this to me too from their own memories, is how important that space is where the student club offices are.
Yeah.
Right.
And we didn't want to lose that.
Yeah. Cool. And Hagen's like, there are people out there all the time.
Absolutely.
Down there all the time.
Absolutely. I'd say that's the true center of campus. Obviously, given that it's the offices of so many important things. But, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to maybe start to wrap up a little bit.
Yeah. You want to ask the questions, sir?
Yeah, I think our
Did you
last...
save the hard questions for the...
Maybe.
Yeah, we're going to dive into Rousseau and then kind of how he...
I'm ready. Bring it
on. I guess our last real deal question to kind of end on an optimistic note is we wanted to ask, what are your short-term, maybe like 2-year goals for your time as president? What would you want to improve?
I think a precondition for all the other things we want to do is growing enrollment. We've had some tremendous success this year already in that area. I think, let me say two things. One is I want our students, I want us all to remember that students don't have to be here. Right. Now, that doesn't mean you're customers, and we're service providers, so if you don't like the B you got, I'm not going to ask you what you got in Professor Stoner's class or Professor McGrath's class, but if you don't like the B, well, then you say, I'm withholding my tuition until you give me an A. It's not, there is a, it's not a consumer relationship. But it is very important, I think, both to your overall educational experience and to your ability to learn in the classroom, that this be a joyous time in your life, a time of challenge, a time of fun, of exploring new things. Right. So I think listening to students is very important. And the last thing I would say is we want to position the institution, which is where I think Assumption's heart is the kind of place that doesn't make you choose between being ready for a career and having a meaningful life that's awakened to wonder and curiosity. And that's a hard thing. Your branding question earlier got at this. That's a hard thing to bottle, but
and a hard thing to even
can be done.
Explore,
because they're not mutually exclusive.
They are not, and I think a lot of institutions, with the career pressure that I mentioned earlier, institutions have tended. I'm painting with a broad brush, but they've tended to say we're going to go all the way in the direction of career preparation, and the problem with that is that the technology you learned is probably obsolete before you get off the stage at commencement.
That's a good point.
And the same is true, I say technology, but it would have been true of the political systems of Eastern Europe or whatever else. And the other way institutions have gone is to say we're going to retreat to the mountaintop and we're going to think great thoughts that are completely disconnected from the world. And I don't think you have to pick between being ready for meaningful engagement in the world whether it's in your profession, whether it's, as Professor Dobsky says, the one job everybody knows they're going to have, which is being a citizen.
Right.
Whether it's a sense of personal meaning, the kind of education we provide, and I think Catholic liberal education at its best can provide both.
Yeah, that's good. I saw this I think it was a study. I don't know if it'd be considered a study, but Dell Technologies and this company, Institute for the Future or something, they released they estimated that 85% of the jobs in 2030 have not been created yet, which I think is crazy. It totally reflects on the point that liberal arts is huge.
Yeah.
Well, we have a trustee who's an alum. I won't say who he is or where he works, but a very senior, successful executive in the financial industry. And one of the things he told me once is when he looks around his office, the people crunching the data and other things that are beyond my understanding have to be very technically educated. And we do that, by the way. I mean, a finance major, for example, does that. That's important.
Sure.
He said when he looks around at who's generating the ideas, who's managing those people, who's running the place. His colleagues are a classics major. They're from the liberal arts.
Yeah, that's cool.
Not exclusively, but
Right.
they've been formed. Their intellects and their souls, I think, have been formed in a way that they wouldn't be at a lot of other places.
It makes them ready to be great employees, great employers, and contribute. Yeah.
Well, as I said at the inauguration, I think the most important thing employers need to know about Assumption students is they will show up on the first day and do the jobs with integrity and with agility and with enthusiasm. And that is something a lot of employers are telling us is not a common thing.
Yeah, it seems like I'd say you've achieved humility, because we asked you this question and you talked about what your goals are for the students and the school in general, but what is your goal for yourself? And you could also explain what you think you've already learned, but what's your goal?
In terms of learning from the job, you mean?
Maybe just the involvement of your job in your life and how it will impact your life.
Well, if my family is watching, I would like to, whether they are or not, I would like to work on work-life balance. I'm not the best exemplar of that. I think it's hard for me in some ways to separate that question because the success of this institution is very personal to me.
Fair enough.
That's great to hear.
This is not. This is a place I came to teach. First of all, because it did have a reputation as a unique and high quality political science department, but also because they were hiring it. It's not easy to get faculty jobs, but I very quickly fell in love with the mission of the institution. So that success is very important to me too. But if I can do that while balancing being a little more attentive to other responsibilities, that would be a good thing.
Yeah,
Cool.
it shows your commitment. And then you spoke about the book you're writing on limitations. Would you say that your role as president is a limitation for you?
In terms of writing?
In terms of the idea that kind of we touched on before, that limitations are possibly good, if we did touch on that.
Sure. So there's a practical limitation, which is that I don't, I used to write a lot of op-eds and articles and spend a lot of time on scholarship. And, I just don't have the same brain space. In the classroom, by the way, I think all your professors would tell you this. The classroom is where ideas get developed. We learn from you as much as you learn from us.
Interesting.
So that's a little bit harder. The thesis of the book, though, is that, and I think this goes back to in some ways to our Catholic identity, is that accepting the limitations on our horizons, and the book goes into the idea that the principles, both on the right and on the left, on which contemporary politics is based, are illimitable, and that creates a serious stalemate. Because if what I'm looking for is, for example, nostalgia and a return to some romanticized vision of the past, then it's kind of wrong for me to compromise on that, because it's such an intrinsic good. And on the other side of the aisle, if what I'm looking for is progress or however else you want to phrase it, when principles can't be limited, it becomes I think it becomes toxic for politics, because it makes compromise not only difficult but actually immoral.
Wow. Okay. That's a perspective I've never heard before. I appreciate that.
And
So,
it's
You gonna buy
know,
the book?
I should now. Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm gonna buy the book. I mean,
You
that
should
sounds.
buy it twice.
Gotcha.
I don't know about that. I'm just kidding. I'll send it to my grandma. She'll get you one too. I'm
Yeah,
just
I have
kidding.
to write it. I have to write it before you buy it. That's
What was that?
I have to write it before you buy it. That's the one challenge.
That's
That is
fair. How
good
close are
point.
you? How many more hours? Do you
I've got plenty left to do.
Okay, fair enough.
We wish
Well,
you luck.
Yeah, no. It ties into what we're learning about. We learned that about Rousseau, his explanation of things regarding that, and
Yeah.
just speaks
I
again
would
to
say
class.
he's an example of an illimitable thinker, a thinker without limits.
I would totally agree.
So right, but I would say that like he does that on purpose for the reader to possibly understand the negative parts of his writing that it seems seems limitless. That's kind of what I took. I really like Rousseau, so that's why I probably took that. But
He's definitely fun to read.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can wrap it up there. This was
Yeah.
a good episode.
This
It was
was
our
excellent.
first interview with both of us, so it was kind of weird for us, but I think it
You
went
did great.
great. Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
it.
All right. Thank
Appreciate
you.
you having me
appreciate
here,
it.
and yeah, it was excellent.
Anytime.
Episode 7. Books.
Fantastic.